oral narrative will either be a legend, it will either be a myth, an etiological narrative, a dilemma, an ogre, or a trickster narrative. And there are narratives that are going to fall on either two types of narrative. You may find a narrative that is that qualifies to be an ogre, but still under that narrative, one of the character is tricking the other character. So you'll have two choices. Either you classify it as an ogre narrative or a trickster narrative. The main thing with paper 2, you just need to illustrate why you are saying a certain narrative is the choice that you've given it. Without explanation, you may be on the losing end as a student. So as we prepare for our KCSE paper 2, we strive to really illustrate the answers that we give so that the examiner has something to award us marks with. Now, that was question number 1 that we are likely to encounter when you're looking at oral narratives. Classify the above narrative, and that one we have said when you're told to classify, we'll be looking at which are the different types of oral narratives that we have in literature. Then question 2, illustrate features of the story, or you illustrate the features that make that story an oral narrative. That is another possible likely question that we are going to be tackling whenever we are talking about oral narratives. So we ask ourselves, which are the features of oral narratives? Again, that is a likely question that we'll encounter when we're looking at English paper 2. Question number 3. One of the feature will be opening formula. Now, when you're looking at features, we are asking ourselves, why exactly is how different is an oral narrative from like a song? How different it is from let's say a comprehension, from a poem. What makes an oral narrative an oral narrative? So those are the features that we are trying to illustrate with that question. When you ask which are the features evident that makes the above story an oral narrative, one we've listed is the use of opening formula. Now, this feature, when you're starting an oral narrative, there's going to be a style in which you start that oral narrative. How you start it is what we are calling opening formula. Now, opening formula, for example, you'll have a story starting with once upon a time. So in the exam, you'll say there is opening formula, and then you give the example once upon a time. There'll also be long ago. Again, that will be an opening formula. You can also have one day. Again, that will be an opening formula. So opening formula is how oral narratives normally open, or how you start an oral narrative. Now, note this, not oral narratives will have opening formulas, so we are not going to force them on those narratives. You just read your oral narrative and see whether you have an opening formula. If you do have one, then you identify that one as an opening formula. But if there isn't, there is no way you write it and it scores just by the fact that opening formula is a feature of oral narratives. So you have to be very careful and see whether your oral narratives have opening formula. Then feature number 2, closing formula. So again, if we are opening a narrative, we tend to close it. So there's going to be a part where we are closing our oral narrative, and how we close an oral narrative is what we call the closing formula. For example, we have we all know they lived happily ever after, so that will be a closing formula. Others will have that marks the end of our story. Again, that will be a closing formula. And just like we've said in part 1 about opening formula, not all oral narratives will have a closing formula. Some will just end without having one. But if you're lucky enough and you find that you have a closing formula in your narrative, then you state it out. Feature number 3 of oral narrative is the use of songs. Oral narratives, unlike any other maybe genre of oral literature, will use songs as one of its features. A song, mostly it's sung to break the monotony of the story. So you've been telling a story, and then because there is boredom, if you do the same thing over and over, you bring in a song, it will break the monotony. Again, the song itself, as part of the story, will be serving a particular message. So maybe if you have a narrative of the ogre, and then you are having maybe a girl kidnapped by an ogre, the girl decides to run away. So you're going to, maybe the girl will start singing so that to alert the villagers that she's in trouble. So you look at what is the message of the song, because once you can be asked what is the purpose of the song in that oral narrative. So besides it being a feature of an oral narrative, it also serves other purposes in the said story. Next feature is the use of fantasy. Now, oral narratives apply a lot of imagination, things that when you look at them or when you read about them, may never happen in real life. For example, in a story told about an ogre swallowing a whole village alive, and then a warrior comes and slits the stomach open, and then the whole village comes out alive. That is imagination, things that cannot happen in real life, and that is what we call use of fantasy. So when you're looking at narratives and you realize there are extraordinary things happening, then that will be use of fantasy. The other feature is timelessness. Now, this is a feature that oral narratives do not tell us exactly when the events took place. We therefore give them the feature of timelessness. They'll not tell you whether the story was taking place in 2000, in 1900, today or tomorrow. That will not be stated. So with that, we get the feature of timelessness, the fact that they do not have a particular time when the stories were told. So mostly, for you to identify timelessness, you look at the opening formula. When a story starts one day, once upon a time, that will be a feature of, apart from it being an opening formula, it will also indicate that we have timelessness. We do not have a particular time in which the story took place. Then the next style, feature, oral narratives will also make use of ideophones. Now, ideophones are those exact sounds that are produced or made by animals, objects, or even people. Like the way a baby cries, that particular sound will be an example of an ideophone. Or if you drop an object, the sound that it will make, that will be an ideophone. Then closely related to ideophones also a feature of oral narratives is onomatopoeia. Now, onomatopoeia, if an idiophone, for example, is, let's say, the crying of a baby. So in the narrative, there'll be a sound like nge or something like that. So this will be the idiophone. The onomatopoeia will be now the English name to that sound. So we'll say maybe crying. So these two are closely related. Idiophone gives us the sound. Onomatopoeia gives us the name of that sound. The hissing, maybe there was a snake that was hissing in your narrative. So the hissing will be that sound. And then the name of the sound will be hissing. Again, that will now be the onomatopoeia. So the idiophones are the exact sounds, and mostly they are not English words. You can never find an idiophone in a dictionary. But now the name given to that sound is what we call onomatopoeia. So if you come across such, you will either identify one as an idiophone and the other one as onomatopoeia, words like banging. The bees will be buzzing. What the tires normally do, like scratching. The chirrups of the birds. All these will be onomatopoeia. The difference is onomatopoeia will be in your dictionary because it's an English word. Idiophones are just sounds that are made, and the two are a part of features of oral narratives. Then the other feature is personification, and as we have learnt in class, personification is giving inanimate things animate abilities. For example, you'll make in a trickster narrative where the hare is talking and maybe planning on how they'll go and kill their mothers, and the hyena responds. So you're giving animals abilities that are only given to human beings. That is what we call personification. So mostly where you're having animal characters, there'll be a lot of personification because you'll be making the animals will be talking. Maybe the lion is calling for a meeting. Again, personification comes in. At times, not even the animals, even you're told that the wind was whistling. Whistling is only done by human beings, but when we say the wind was whistling, again, that will be personification. The sun was peeping through the cracks of the room. Again, that will be personification. So personification in narratives will involve inanimate objects being given animate abilities or human abilities. And that will mark the end of that question when you're told to illustrate features of the story that make that story an oral narrative. We're just asking ourselves, how is it different? Why is an oral narrative different from, how is it different from a comprehension, from a song, from a poem? It becomes different because of those features of oral narratives. So again, once you'll not score just because you've stated that it is true the story has there is use of fantasy, but you just stating and moving on to the next question will not earn you any marks. So you state and you explain. When you say there is there is use of song, at least quote the first line of the song. You say the song sung by the ogre or the girl in the story. So key thing in this question, to encourage our students, we have to write. Once you write a point, you have to illustrate. Don't go assuming that the question has maybe 4 marks, so one will score 2, the other one will also score 2. For it to score 2, then it means you stated and you illustrated. So once you illustrate, you state the different types or the features of the oral narratives. Make sure that you also illustrate why you're saying those features are evident. So that is the other question that you're likely to be asked when an oral narrative happens to be in your question 3, paper 2. Then another interesting question that we also tackle in oral narratives you can be asked, what is the moral lesson? Now note this, there are times that moral lesson becomes part of the features of oral narrative. So at times it is categorized under the features, and other times it comes as a question on its own. You're asked, what is the moral lesson? Moral lesson is basically, what have you learned from that narrative? Once you've read it, exactly what did you learn? That becomes the moral lesson. You are encouraged as the student to state moral lesson positively. For example, we learn to be wise, like the king lion, who decided maybe between one or two other decisions that he made. You learn, let it be a positive, learn it positively or state it positively, and then you make sure you're referring it back to the story. Don't just say we learn to be wise. Who was wise in the story? We learn to be wise, like the king lion in the story, in how he made his decisions. So let it be stated positively and let it be referred back to the narrative. Don't just leave it hanging. There are students who will state the moral lesson in terms of a proverb, which is still okay, provided you relate that proverb in the story. Don't just go pasting answers without having given evidence why you are stating that answer. Because after all, literature, anything can be correct. Depends on how you'll argue out your point. Then we have another question on, you are asked on economic activities. You're told to state the economic activities of that particular community. Now with economic activities, you're looking at the source of livelihood. How do people earn? Maybe they earn their income, or how are they able to bring food to the table? So those will be economic activities. Now, a story will not tell you directly that these are the economic activities. It's you to look at some signals, some mentions of some things that will help you know that we have this type of economic activity. For example, mention of cows. You see, maybe they were going to sell cows, they are goats, they are milking, something like that. Maybe they are sheep. We have chicken in that community. The economic activity there will be livestock, maybe livestock farming. And you illustrate, maybe mention of cows, goats, just that. So the story didn't tell you that there is livestock farming, but by you seeing the mention of cows, then you will tell that there was livestock farming. And then you'll have, for example, you have crops that are there. They are growing maize, they are growing sorghum, there is millet. Again, you'll have crop farming. So it will be a livestock activity, an economic activity. Then we'll have other economic activities like hunting. They went hunting. The young man went hunting. We'll have trade. Maybe they are selling. There are things that they are selling. Again, that will be an economic activity. They can also be pastoralists. Again, that will be an economic activity. So when you're told to mention about economic activities, we are looking at source of livelihood. How do the people in the narrative make money, or how are they able to get their daily bread? That will form economic activity. Then we have, still related to activities, we can have social. You can either be asked to mention economic activities or social activities. From the word social, we are looking at the activities that these people engage in, so to promote togetherness. When you talk of people being social, how do they interact? Which are the activities that bring them together? In a society, we can have activities such as weddings. So maybe the girl getting married to the ogre. Again, that one will have a wedding. We can have initiation ceremonies. We can even have dowry payment. So they are paying dowry, and you also illustrate. Those will be the social activities. So social activities are made up of the activities that the communities normally involve themselves in when they are coming together. When you have a wedding, people automatically come together. When you have a dowry ceremony, when you have initiation ceremonies, even naming ceremonies where children, or when you give birth, a young mother gives birth, and then people come to celebrate that ceremony. That will be a social activity. Now, still social, we can get cultural activities, which are the cultural activities, or called socio-cultural activities. Cultural comes from the culture. So again, wedding is a cultural activity. Naming is a cultural activity. Initiation is a cultural activity. So that is how you handle economic, social, and cultural activities. And then on to our next question. We are looking at how will these oral narratives be tested, so that we don't just read for them blindly. We need to work smart as students preparing for our exams. When you get to, after the activities, we can also ask ourselves, which are the characteristics of the above narrative? Now, note this is not the same as features of oral narrative, because features are general. Features will apply to the six different types of narratives that we have. But the question can narrow down and asks you to state the characteristics of that genre or the oral narrative, so that if it's a dilemma will have its own characteristics. Like, for example, it leaves the audience in suspense. That is characteristic of a dilemma. If you're looking at a myth and you are asked which are the characteristics of myths, myths will involve supernatural beings. Again, myths are sacred. So we get the difference between features of an oral narrative and also characteristics of that said narrative. So when you see that, it's good we get prepared. We know that the 6 types, we get to learn or read about their characteristics. Which are the characteristics of a dilemma, characteristics of a myth, of an etiological narrative, so that in case the exam asks which are the characteristics of that genre, you are able to state them confidently. Then the next question, this one normally touches on field work. Mostly oral literature will not be written for you, so we are assumed that we'll go to the field, collect these different types of narratives. So you are asked questions to do with how would you collect information if you are sent to the field to collect the above oral narratives. And then, for example, which methods will you use for data collection? For example, questionnaires, the use of questionnaires. You will do interviews. You'll also carry out observation. So you are asking yourself, and I believe this one is learnt in geography, methods of data collection, so that you are able to tell the examiner, this is what I do, observation, and then illustrate how you do it. I'll issue questionnaires, again illustrate how you'll do it, and so on and so forth. The different types of data collection. And then you can also be asked, still under fieldwork, which are the challenges that you as the researcher are likely to encounter. Again, we borrow notes from our geography. For example, we have language barrier. If you're going to a community that does not understand exactly the language that you're using, transport can also be an issue. You can also have hostile environment, or the respondents are hostile. You can also have challenges to do with the weather. Those will be challenges or the problems that you as the researcher are likely to encounter. These are not commonly asked questions, but it's good also to touch fieldwork, because it's part of oral literature, so that if you're asked how you'd collect data and what challenges you're going to encounter, you are able to answer them confidently. Then still in oral narrative, you're going to have a grammar question. That one will not miss out. Apart from the other parts that we've looked at, you will still have a grammar question that either maybe carries 1 mark. You're brought for a direct speech sentence, and then you're told to change it into indirect speech, or you're brought for a question, a statement, and then you're asked to add a question tag. So oral literature will also test some few elements of grammar. It's good to revisit our notes, so that we are able to tell, if it's a question tag, this is what I'll do. If you're told to rewrite, again, this is what I will do. And then we have still under oral narratives, you can be asked, in fact, mostly you're asked to give the character traits of the characters that are in the story, so that if your story was a trickster story, you're asked to give the character traits of the hare. Let's say it had the hare and the hyena. So the hare being the one that tricked the hyena, you can say maybe the hare is cunning, and then you illustrate. So the character trait must be stated using an adjective. So you'll be saying cunning, brave, all those adjectives, and then you illustrate. You will not go stating character traits without giving illustrations, because the examiner really wants to see that you understood why you said an animal is wise. Why did you say the hyena was foolish, and yet another person thought the hyena was wise? So the character traits are stated using adjectives, and then the said adjectives must be well illustrated. So you state and you illustrate. Those are questions that you should not leave blank spaces. Give as many adjectives as you can, and also try to explain those adjectives. Don't move out of the room saying how easy question 3 was, yet your work was just stating and not illustrating. When you look at the time allocated to English paper 2, those are 2 hours 30 minutes, meaning it's a broad paper that requires you to really write, and whatever you're stating must be illustrated. So let us not be like students who will take 1 hour 30 minutes and then sleep for the remaining 1 hour. We use our time consciously. We make sure that we are writing, illustrating these character traits. Then another likely question to be asked in still paper 2, we are looking at still question 3. When you read a certain narrative, the examiner may ask, who is the appropriate audience for the above narrative? So in this case, you are being asked, whom do you think is suitable to listen or to read or to be narrated to this narrative? Who do you think it will benefit? It can be, for example, in a situation, there is a story we read where there's a girl who only decided that she would get married to the most handsome man. And then in the village, no one seemed to be handsome enough for her. So an ogre transformed into a very handsome young man, and the girl fell into the trap. So the girl was just basically looking at the looks of her future husband, and that is how she got tricked into marrying the ogre. So in that situation, when you ask who is the most appropriate person to listen to that or to be narrated to that story, you'll be looking at young people who are aspiring to get married in future. Can be young women, can be young men. So the suitable audience, who do you think this story will benefit much if they were to listen to it? So that is another probable question that can be in your question 3. And then of course, maybe you're told to explain certain meanings of sentences. What do you think exactly that line meant when used in the narrative? So basically, we've not really exhausted all, but those are the major areas that question 3 will be looking at. And in this case, we are talking of question 3 that is an oral narrative, because question 3 can either be a poem, can be a song, can be an oral narrative. But our topic for today is looking at question 3 in the case where we are brought for an oral narrative. Which are the likely questions that we are likely to encounter in this question? So I've said 1, it is good you're conversant with the types of narratives, the different types of narratives, so that you are confident enough. Once you read a story, you're able to tell what type of a narrative it is. Classify the above narrative. You'll say it's this and you illustrate. You'll not just say a story is a trickster and leave it at that. You'll have to say exactly why is that story a trickster. So let us teach ourselves to really illustrate the answers that we give in paper 2, and in this case in question number 3. We've said again, we can be asked which are the features evident in the above narrative. Again, we've exhausted those features, so it's good to, as you sit for your paper 2, you know which are the features of an oral narrative. Why is an oral narrative different from a song, different from a comprehension, different from any other genre of oral literature? Then question 3, we've said we can be asked what is the moral lesson, what you're learning from that story. Again, we've said we can be asked to state we state and illustrate economic activities, and we've seen how we identify those said economic activities. We can be asked to identify social activities, cultural activities, or social cultural activities. Again, we can be asked to assume you're going for a field work. Under field work, we can have questions like, how do you collect data that you're going to use, or how will you collect the above narrative? So we look at the different types or methods of data collection. Again, we look at which are the challenges that we can encounter in the field. It's good you're also conversant with those different challenges. And then we have been asked, we've also looked at character traits. The oral narratives will pick a few characters from the given narratives, and then we are asked to give or to describe the character traits of those given characters. And we've said and agreed that we'll be using adjectives to describe a character, just like how you describe a person being beautiful, the other one being handsome, the other one being intelligent, hardworking. All those will be describing a person. The same thing will happen to oral narratives. You're describing hair, you'll not say because it's an animal, there's no way you describe. You will give the hair the adjectives that will also be given to, maybe in case it was a a human character. You give the adjectives and ensure that you explain. And then again, we've seen that we can also be asked who is the most appropriate audience for that narrative. You look at who do you think will benefit from that story if they were to listen to it, who exactly benefits from it, and then you give, and you also make sure you illustrate. That other question we've said is characteristics of the different types of oral narratives. So it's good that as we sit for our exam, we look at the characteristics of the different types of narratives. So you're good when you look at dilemma, you're able to tell which are the characteristics. Forget about the features of oral narratives. Every narrative has its own characteristics, such that you cannot say that, like in the case of a dilemma, you cannot say dilemmas are sacred as one of the characteristics. But if it's a myth, you can say myths are sacred or religious, they involve supernatural beings. So that will be a characteristic unique only to a myth. So it's very important as a student, you find out the different characteristics of the six main types of oral narratives. So this is a question question 3 carrying 20 marks. It's a question you can easily pass because assuming it's an oral narrative, we do not have other questions that will come out of the questions that we've looked at. Mostly they'll measure on that. What is the type of the narrative given? Which are the features of the narrative? What are the characteristics of the above narratives? How would you describe character 1 or character 2? So this question will require you read the narrative well, you understand it just like you do with the comprehension, and then you start asking yourself the kind of narrative it is, which are the features. Ensure you identify as many as you can, provided you illustrate, your answers are well illustrated. So we should not be shying away from question number 3 simply because it's oral literature. In any case, oral literature must be the most interesting thing because this is something we do practically in class when you are listening to your grandma or your grandfather or even our own parents. They narrate to us these stories. So once it comes in an exam, it should be easy to tackle it. You ensure you're not leaving any gap spaces. Just write, enjoy the story, the questions, and ensure the examiner also will enjoy the answers that you are going to provide. If there are any questions, you can write to the KU TV pages and we'll be sure to tackle those said questions in any area, not just about our class, but maybe in the different other areas on paper 2. We'll gladly be of help. Thank you for listening to this lesson. Enjoy the rest of your day.